Good evening, and thank you for joining us again as we continue our walk together through Psalm 23. Let's read it all together just now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This psalm takes us on a journey. It describes the life of a Christian. It describes how God is with us like a caring sheep and his shepherd. And one of the things that I love about this psalm is just how honest it is and how applicable it is to our everyday lives. We see this very clearly in verse 4, where we find ourselves this evening. And the question at hand is this: how do we live fearlessly in a world that is sometimes terrifying? How do we live fearlessly even in the face of death? Fear is common in our lives, and it is an emotion that has been turned into a commodity. Insurance agencies, security companies, and advertisers all play on our fears to influence our decisions and seek to make us subject to our fear for their gain. But this psalm shows us that there is a better fix for our fear than even insurance, alarms, or material comforts. The psalm to this point has taken us through green pastures, still waters of refreshing and smooth paths, and now we find ourselves in verse 4. There is a dramatic change of landscape. No longer are we in the peaceful plains. No longer is the sun shining on our faces. We are in the cold, dark, shadowy valley. It seems as though everything has changed. But there are two easily overlooked words that introduce this verse for us. Even though. Even though. This little phrase anchors us. It roots us in the truths that we learned in verses 1 to 3, the unchangeable truths about who the shepherd is. He is the one who guides, the one who cares for, protects, and provides. He is the strong and sovereign one, and he is in ultimate control of the journey. And this even though tells us that although the landscape has changed, the shepherd has not. Everything we learned about him remains true. This is such an important lesson for us to hold on to, especially when we are going through times of great difficulty in our lives, as many of you are just now. I love the words of a song written by Abigail Miller called "Don't Doubt in the Dark." And it says this: "Don't doubt in the dark what God told you in the light. Truth won't go away if it's hidden from your sight. God will never change. His truths will remain. So rest your heart and don't get lost in the dark." The psalmist has walked into a dark valley, translated as the valley of deepest darkness, or the valley of the shadow of death. How did he get here? Was it a misstep? Has he wandered off carelessly, leaving his shepherd to wonder how to find him? Well, if we track the progress of the psalmist on his journey, I think it becomes clear that this is a necessary part of his walk. And the Hebrew grammar shows that this leg of the journey, although it may feel like a detour, is not. It is linked to the previous 3 verses, with the shepherd guiding and leading. On his journey with the shepherd towards perfect rest in verse 6, the psalmist has to walk through valleys of darkness. And we experience this in our own lives too, don't we? We all come through valleys. Some short, some seemingly endless, some seem cavernous and bottomless. The valley that we all have to face, and one which for many of us casts a long shadow, is that of death. We all know that this life as we know it will not last forever. For many of us, this thought is frightening. We have fear of having our lives cut short, fear of being separated from loved ones, fear of what comes next, maybe. Well, another easily overlooked word gives us hope in this psalm. It tells us that this valley of death is not the end. There is something next. The psalmist is not simply walking into a dark valley, never to re-emerge. He is walking through. The valley is a point of transit on his way to glory. Despite the threat of danger that lurks in this valley, we discover something amazing. The psalmist is not afraid. He states boldly, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Is this simply bravado? Is he foolhardy? No, he sees clearly in the dark what God showed him in the light. He knows that this shadow cannot ultimately harm him. In fact, it is interesting to think about what a shadow is. It is a form of darkness, but it is not simply the absence of light. In fact, it only exists by virtue of there being a great light present. Though the darkness is real, it is only a shadow, and he knows that the light has not gone away. His shepherd remains with him. God is with him. Yahweh is the God who promises by his very name and nature to be with his sheep always. Even in the darkness, when we might be tempted to think that we are alone, God is there. This is the primary reason that the psalmist faces death unafraid. He is unafraid because God is with him. And not only is God with him, God is for him. He beats back evil and rescues the psalmist from any ultimate danger. We see this in the use of the shepherd's rod and staff, tools that the shepherd used to beat back attackers and pull his sheep away from danger. Even as we go through death, God does this for us. He, through the death of his Son on the cross, overcame death. He took on death for us and won when he rose victorious from the grave. We see this truth spoken of by Jesus to Martha at the grave of Lazarus. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die." It is this knowledge that allows the psalmist to face death unafraid. Last week, Lisa, my wife, who is a doctor, was at the home of an elderly Christian man. He was dying and he was in pain, and she was there to help him through his last hours. The man's wife was also there and commented how he had been reading through the Psalms for comfort. With Lisa was one of her colleagues who isn't a Christian, and they both gave medical assistance and comfort. Not long later, the man died peacefully at home and with a smile on his face. Later in the day, Lisa's colleague was speaking with her and commented how she had seen many people die, and she had observed a consistent difference in the deaths of those who die with faith. This is something that you may have seen. It's something that Charles Wesley famously said when speaking to a physician who was familiar with death, who said to Charles Wesley, "Most people die for fear of dying, but I never met with people such as yours. They are none of them afraid of death, but are calm and patient and resigned to the last." And Charles Wesley responded, "Our people die well." One of the songs we often sing here says, "No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me." It is not because the psalmist is particularly brave or courageous or perhaps stupid that he has no fear in this valley. It is because he knows the presence of God with him, fighting for him and comforting him. This is the final phrase of this verse in Psalm 23. "Your rod and staff, they comfort me." The word comfort is nacham and denotes a deep sigh of release, like the sigh of a rescued man collapsing into the arms of his rescuer. This is the kind of comfort that is experienced by Wesley's people who died well. This is the comfort of Christians who know the protecting, comforting presence of God even in the valley of the shadow of death. This is the comfort that dispels fear. The psalmist is unafraid of evil because he knows and reveres God, because he fears him, not in the sense of running in terror, but in bowing in awe at who he is. The question is, what is it that you are afraid of today? And what are you doing to dispel your fears? Is your fear allayed by insurance policies, security systems, and material comforts? I hope not. These things will not last. They will ultimately fail, and none of them can shelter you from the greatest valley, the darkest shadow that any of us will face: death. Only Jesus Christ, in his death and resurrection for us, can give us assurance that when we trust him and walk with him, we can face death unafraid, because he has defeated death for us and his eternal life is ours. If we know him as shepherd, we can be certain that when we pass through the valley of the shadow of death, we will emerge into his brilliant light and perfect rest forever. So how do you live without fear in the face of death? The way to fear no evil, as the psalmist does, is to fear God instead. Not to run from him in terror, but to see his power, his holiness, his death-defeating might, and to bow at his feet, knowing that he is the shepherd who is willing to fight for you and comfort you, even and especially in the valley. I pray that you will know him like this today. If you don't, and you would like to find out more about this, please get in touch via our website. We would love to speak to you. Thank you.